There's a question I want you to sit with for just a second before we do anything else. Think about the last time you felt really good about something you'd done. A decision you made, progress you noticed, a version of yourself you were quietly proud of. Now, how long did that feeling last before you looked at someone else and it got smaller? Maybe it was a few hours, maybe a few minutes. That's what I want to talk about today, because that moment, the one where your progress shrinks the second someone else enters the frame, that moment is a clue. And most of us are reading the clue completely backwards. Welcome back to Uplifted Living. I'm Nick Gilbert. This is Season 2, Episode 2. Last week, we talked about the identity lag, that gap between who you're becoming and who you still think you are. And I got to thinking about what makes that lag so much harder to sit in. What makes the in-between feel unbearable when logically you know you're growing? And the answer almost every time is this. We're not measuring ourselves against where we started. We're measuring ourselves against where someone else is. And that someone else, the person we've chosen as our measuring stick, is almost always ahead of us, or at least appears to be. And so we use them to calculate our progress. And when we do that, the math never works in our favor. I want to introduce to you something I've been calling the comparison mirror. Here's the image. You know those funhouse mirrors? The ones you find at carnivals or amusement parks? The tall, distorted glass that makes you look 6 feet wide or stretched out like a toothpick. The reflection is technically you. Same face, same clothes, same posture. It's you, but it's not accurate. And yet, imagine if that was the only mirror you had. Imagine if every morning, the only reflection available to you was a funhouse version. One that showed your actual self, but through someone else's lens. That's what comparison does. It gives you a technically you reflection. You're in the picture, but the frame is wrong. The scale is off. The lighting is designed for someone else's room. And we make massive decisions about our own worth based on what we see in that mirror. What I want to explore today is this. Why do we keep looking in that mirror? And what would it take to find one that actually shows us something true? Because I think the answer is more interesting and more useful than just stop comparing yourself to others. You've heard that 100 times. I'm not here to tell you that again. I want to give you something that actually works. A few years ago, I went through a stretch where I was genuinely making real changes. Not dramatic overnight stuff, just quieter, steadier growth. The kind we talk about a lot here. I was sleeping better. I was more present in conversations. I was writing more consistently than I ever had before. And for a while, that felt like enough. And then I made the mistake of spending an afternoon scrolling through the feed of someone I'd gone to school with. This person, by all external appearances, had built something remarkable. A business, a creative life, a platform, a life that looked from the outside like it had it all together in all the ways mine didn't. And I remember sitting back and doing the math. Same age, same starting point, same amount of time on the planet. And then looking at my life, my modest progress, my unfinished drafts, my small, quiet wins, and feeling genuinely like I was behind. Not behind in any objective sense. There's no scoreboard. I knew that logically, but the comparison mirror doesn't care about logic. It just shows you the image and lets your brain do the rest. And my brain did what brains do. It built a case. You should be further along. Look at what's possible. Look at what you haven't done yet. It took me a while to realize what was actually happening. And when I did, when I finally understood what the comparison was really about, it changed things. Here's what I've come to understand about comparison. It's almost never about the other person. What comparison is actually doing underneath the surface is pointing at something in you, a desire you haven't fully acknowledged, a value you hold but haven't acted on yet, a version of yourself you want to become and haven't figured out how to reach. The funhouse mirror isn't lying about the destination, it's lying about the distance. And those are two very different problems. Because if the mirror is lying about your distance, if the gap between you and where you want to be is actually smaller than it looks, then the whole story changes. You're not behind. You're in the lag, still updating, still installing. But you've been using the wrong mirror to check your progress. And today, I want to help you find a better one. Okay, 3 anchors here. Things you can actually do with this starting today. Anchor 1, identify which mirror you're using. Not all comparison is the same. And before you can change anything, you have to know what you're actually looking at. There are 3 mirrors most of us use without realizing it. The achievement mirror, for one. Someone who has built something you want to build. A business, a body of work, a relationship, a creative life. You measure your output against theirs. The timeline mirror. Someone who got there faster than you. Same age, less time, more results. You measure your pace against theirs. The third one is the ease mirror. Someone who appears to do it all without struggle. They make it look effortless. You measure your effort against their apparent lack of it. Take a second and actually name that mirror. Who are you comparing yourself to right now? Which mirror is it? Because each one is distorting something different. And the thing being distorted is the thing you need to look at directly. The achievement mirror is distorting your vision of what's possible for you. The timeline mirror is distorting your relationship with your own pace. The ease mirror is almost always lying. It's hiding the work you never see. Name the mirror, name what it's distorting. That's the first move. Anchor 2, switch to the before mirror. The only comparison that's actually useful is you compared to a past version of you. Not last week, not last month, I mean real distance. 6 months, a year, 2 years ago. The version of you that existed before you started doing the work you're doing now. And I want you to do this with some specificity. Not I've grown a lot in a vague motivational poster kind of way. Actually ask the question, what would the version of me from 2 years ago think about a decision I made this week? What would they say about how I handled that conversation or that setback or that moment where I chose differently than I would have before? Because that version of you, the before version, is the only fair measuring stick. They started where you started. They had the same access you had, and the distance between then and now, that's real. That's not distorted. That's the actual receipt. We talked in season 1 about the confidence receipt, the small, specific evidence your brain can actually point to. The before mirror is where you collect them. Anchor 3, read the comparison as information, not verdict. This is the one I want to sit with the longest because it's the most counterintuitive. Most of us treat comparison like a judgment. The mirror shows us something, and we accept it as a verdict about our worth, our pace, our ceiling. But what if you treated it as a data point instead? Here's what I mean. When you look at that person, the one who triggers the comparison, and you feel that contraction in your chest, that uncomfortable, I should be further along feeling, that feeling is not a failure. It's a compass. It's pointing at something you actually want, something you actually value, something that matters to you. Not because you saw it on someone else's page, but because some part of you already recognized it as yours. The funhouse mirror didn't invent the desire. It just reflected it back to you in a distorted frame. So the question to ask instead of, why am I so far behind, is this: what is this comparison showing me that I actually want for myself? And what's one small step I could take toward it? Not because they did it, but because I want it for me. That move from verdict to compass changes everything. The comparison stops being evidence against you and starts being a signal toward you. Quick pause. If you're new here and this is landing for you, the best thing you can do now is subscribe. New episodes every other week, and we're building something here in season 2 that I think you're going to want to stay for. Okay, back to it. I want to say something directly because I know the person who's drawn to this podcast. And I know that comparison hits differently for you than it does for most. You're not the person who compares and gets angry. You're not the person who compares and gets competitive. You're the person who compares and gets quiet. It goes inward. You make it mean something about your ceiling. You sit with it alone. You don't always say it out loud, but it settles somewhere. And it changes how you see yourself for days. And I want to be honest about something. The just stop comparing yourself advice doesn't work for you. Not because you're not trying, but because you're too self-aware for it. You already know you shouldn't be comparing. You've read the books. You know what comparison does to focus and to confidence. And knowing that doesn't make the mirror go away. So this isn't about stopping the comparison. It's about what you do the moment you notice it's happening. Because that moment, the one where you catch yourself looking in the funhouse mirror, that moment of noticing is something. It means the part of you that knows better is paying attention. It means the update is still running. You are not stuck in the comparison. You're passing through it. There's a real difference between those two things. You haven't been failing at growth. You've been using the wrong mirror to check if it's working. Now you have a different one. Last week, I said that season 2 begins in the float. After the balloon rises, after the sandbags are gone, in that quiet, unfamiliar altitude where you're figuring out what the view from up here looks like. And here's the thing about floating at a new altitude that I didn't say last week. When you look around, you can see other balloons. Some of them are higher. Some of them got there faster. Some of them look like they're barely working to stay up. And every single one of them is on a completely different flight path with completely different wind currents, carrying completely different weight. You cannot navigate your balloon by watching theirs. You can admire them. You can even learn from them. But the moment you start using their altitude to judge your own, you've stopped flying your balloon and started watching theirs. And that's when you start to drift. The work of season 2, the quiet, ongoing work underneath all these conversations, is learning to navigate by your own instruments. Not by the mirror that shows you someone else's reflection. Not by the timeline that someone else set. Not by the version of success that was built for a completely different flight. By yours. By the before mirror. By the behavioral receipts. By the compass inside the comparison that's pointing at what you actually want. That's the practice. Not dramatic, not loud, not a highlight reel. Just steadier, clearer, more you. Thank you for being here this week. Genuinely. If today's episode resonated, pass it along to someone who's been quiet lately, who might be in the comparison loop right now and doesn't quite have the words for what's happening. Follow the show wherever you listen. New episode in 2 weeks. Take good care of yourself.